Have you ever wondered if our history books are missing entire chapters? Like, what if objects existed that just completely defied our understanding of time, technology, even human civilization? Things we just couldn't explain.
It's a really fascinating thought, isn't it? This idea that maybe there are pieces of a much bigger, sort of stranger puzzle just hidden out there, in plain sight almost.
Absolutely. And today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most iconic and definitely hotly debated examples of that kind of mystery, the Coso artifact. Sometimes it's called the Olancha Geode. It was found in California way back in 1961. And for a lot of people, this isn't just some weird rock. It's like the quintessential out-of-place artifact, a go part, something that just shouldn't exist when and where it was found.
Right. So our mission today is really to unpack all the details, the discovery itself, which is pretty fascinating. Then we'll get into the whole Coso artifact suppression conspiracy theory that kind of exploded around it. And then we need to really dissect these, extraordinary claims. Advanced ancient civilizations. Extraterrestrial visitors. We need to look at that.
We'll look at the so-called evidence for these really radical ideas, and then we'll pivot to the mainstream scientific explanation, the debunking, and finally maybe think about why a theory like this, something so paradigm-shattering, still resonates with people today. Because as you're about to hear, the real shocker with this rock, which looked pretty ordinary on the outside, it was what was inside, something that looked incredibly, almost impossibly like a modern spark plug.
Yeah, that's where the enigma really starts. Okay, so let's dig into this. The story kicks off in the Coso Mountains near Olancha, California. It's February 13th, 1961.
Okay.
You've got 3 amateur rockhounds out there, Wallace Lane, Mike Mikesell, and Virginia Maxey. They're looking for gems, specifically geodes.
Right, typical rockhounding trip. And Mikesell finds this, just a brownish lump.
Pretty much. He spots this dark brown, kind of golf ball sized thing, looked like clay, encrusted with bits of fossil shells, pebbles, seemed like just another mud ball, really. Nothing special from the outside.
Okay, but then they tried to open it.
Exactly. Back at their shop, Mikesell decides to cut it open. He's thinking it's a geode, right? So he expects to see, sparkly quartz crystals inside.
Yeah.
But the diamond saw hits something hard, something weird, and right there embedded in the center of this concretion, a perfectly formed white ceramic cylinder, perfectly round, and it had a metal shaft running right through the middle.
Wow. I can just picture their faces, expecting crystals and finding basically what looked like hardware.
Totally. The resemblance was immediate. It looked just like a modern spark plug, no question.
Which immediately begs the question, how does a spark plug end up inside what looks like a geode? I mean, geodes are supposed to take ages to form, right? Geologically speaking.
That's the crux of it. It just doesn't compute. And Virginia Maxey, one of the discoverers, she quickly became the main voice talking about this thing.
Right.
And she famously claimed, though this is key, it was never really documented properly. She claimed an unnamed geologist looked at the concretion and estimated its age at 500,000 years old.
500,000 years. Whoa.
Yeah, based supposedly on how fast concretions form in that area. And that number, that 500,000 years, that was the bombshell. That's what instantly made it an out-of-place artifact.
Okay, so if it's 500,000 years old, that's completely impossible for a modern spark plug. So right away, she and others started suggesting, well, maybe it's from some super advanced ancient human civilization. Or maybe aliens.
Those were the 2 big theories. And it wasn't just visual. Apparently, an electrical engineer and ufologist named Paul Willis took x-rays of it.
Ah, okay. And what did the x-rays show? Anything interesting?
Well, according to the reports from back then, the x-rays showed things like a tiny metallic spring or maybe a helix at one end, a metallic tip that was magnetic, and a non-magnetic shaft. Basically, internal parts totally consistent with a spark plug.
So the x-rays seemed to confirm the structure inside matched a spark plug too.
That's what the proponents claimed, yeah.
Yeah.
It just added fuel to the fire, convincing them this couldn't be natural.
So the Coso artifact pretty quickly became this huge deal in the OPART community, sort of exhibit A for the idea that our whole timeline of human history and technology is just wrong.
Exactly. Let's unpack those core theories that sprung up around it. The whole Coso artifact suppression conspiracy really hinges on that supposed 500,000-year age. For the believers, it's this classic OPART, an object that just defies its place in time, right? Challenges everything we think we know from archaeology, geology, human evolution.
Right. And the conspiracy usually goes in 2 main directions, although sometimes they kind of blend together. The first one is it's a relic from some lost, super advanced human civilization. What does that imply?
Well, that theory suggests that maybe millions of years ago, way, way before Homo sapiens as we know them, there was another human or human-like civilization on Earth. And they had tech like ours, maybe even better. They existed for maybe ages, then got wiped out by some cataclysm. So this spark plug is like a tiny piece of evidence left behind, proof of sophisticated ancient tech, which of course completely contradicts the standard scientific picture of human evolution, starting with simple stone tools much more recently. It suggests history isn't linear, maybe it's cyclical.
And people often connect this idea to other O parts, don't they? Like the Antikythera mechanism or the Baghdad battery, maybe those weird old maps like the Piri Reis map.
Exactly. They see them all as fragments of this hidden history. Atlantis, Lemuria, whatever you want to call it. A past deliberately erased or suppressed.
Okay, so that's theory one. What's the other main idea?
Theory two is ancient aliens. Simple as that. The spark plug isn't human-made at all. It's extraterrestrial tech.
Ah, left behind.
Yeah. Maybe millions of years ago, aliens visited Earth. Maybe just exploring, maybe mining, maybe even tinkering with early life here. And they either lost this piece of equipment or left it behind accidentally. Maybe it was part of a crashed ship.
So it's like a discarded bit from an alien engine or tool. Proof that aliens were here long ago.
Right. Could be they were just watching us. Or maybe they even intentionally left stuff behind. Seeds of technology, perhaps. This ties right into all those broader ancient astronaut ideas you hear about aliens building pyramids, that kind of thing.
And in both theories, lost humans or ancient aliens, that rock casing, the concretion, is super important, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial, because the claim is that this rock formed around the artifact over potentially hundreds of thousands of years. That makes the rock itself the proof of the object's immense age. It's like a natural time capsule.
And if any that were true, I mean, the implications are just staggering, right? It rewrites everything: human history, evolution, technology, intelligence.
Completely. It raises huge questions. What other knowledge was lost? Are we alone? What's our real place in the universe? And that, according to the conspiracy theorists, is exactly why it had to be suppressed. The implications were just too big, too disruptive.
Which brings us right to the suppression idea itself, the core claim. This discovery was so world-changing it couldn't be allowed out. So a cover-up began.
A multi-layered effort, supposedly.
And the first group often pointed to is the scientific establishment. Why would scientists want to suppress something like this? Isn't discovery their whole thing?
That's the logical question, yeah. But the conspiracy theory argues it's about protecting established paradigms. Think about geology, paleontology, archaeology, entire fields built on the current timeline. An object like this, if proven ancient, just blows that all up.
It challenges the whole out-of-Africa model, linear evolution. Decades of accepted science.
Exactly. And beyond just the theories, proponents say it's about careers, funding, reputations. Academics build their lives on the existing models. So the argument goes they have a vested interest in not having it overturned by some spark plug in a rock.
So how would they suppress it? What are the alleged methods?
Well, dismissal, ridicule, calling it a hoax or just a weird natural thing without really investigating. Specifically, refusing to do the kind of rigorous, independent, maybe even destructive testing that could actually date it or confirm its composition.
So avoid the test that might prove it's real.
That's the claim. And controlling publications, making sure any serious research supporting it just doesn't get published, doesn't get peer-reviewed, kind of quarantining the idea.
Okay, so that's the scientific angle. Then there's the government and military side of the conspiracy. What's their supposed motivation?
Oh, that's usually about national security and, frankly, power. If this thing is real ancient tech or alien tech, imagine the advantage you'd get from reverse engineering it.
Like anti-gravity. Free energy, something totally game-changing.
Potentially, yeah. So any government would want to grab that immediately, study it in secret, think Area 51 type stuff.
Right. And beyond the tech, there's the whole public panic angle.
Revealing that aliens visited or that humans had super tech millions of years ago, that could cause chaos. Shake up religions, economies, social order. So the theory goes, governments would suppress it just to maintain control, keep the public calm, and also monopolize whatever knowledge they could get from it.
And the alleged methods there are pretty dramatic, like just taking it.
Yeah, quiet confiscation, sending agents to just acquire it, and then silencing the discoverers. Pressure, threats, maybe NDAs, explaining why the original finders later seemed reluctant to talk about it much.
That explains their later silence. according to the theory.
And maybe subtle disinformation campaigns, too, spreading it's just a spark plug story to make sure the whole thing seems like a debunked hoax.
You could even imagine certain industries getting nervous too, right? If this hinted at some kind of free energy.
Oh, absolutely. Fossil fuels, automotive, defense, multi-trillion-dollar industries. If this thing even implied a technology that could disrupt them, they'd have a huge incentive to make sure it stayed buried. Powerful lobbying, maybe.
And some versions even bring in religious institutions.
Yeah, the idea being that proof of ancient aliens or pre-Adamite humans would directly contradict literal creation stories for some religions. So maybe quiet pressure from them, too, to maintain established doctrines.
So it paints this picture of a kind of coordinated effort across science, government, industry, maybe even religion, all working to keep this lid on this incredible secret.
That's the core of the suppression theory, yes.
Okay, so for people who believe in this suppression, what's the evidence they point to? What makes them think it's real and covered up?
Well, the number one thing visually is just how much it looks like a spark plug. You cut open this rock and bam, there's this thing with a ceramic insulator, a metal shaft, even hints of a hexagonal casing. Proponents just say, look at it, that's not natural, that's manufactured.
The visual is powerful.
Extremely. Then there's that initial age claim from Virginia Maxey, the 500,000 years from the unnamed geologist. Even though it wasn't formally documented, believers take that as the artifact's true age, and the fact that it was quickly challenged is seen as suspicious, part of the cover-up.
Okay, what else?
The disappearance is a big one. After the initial buzz, the COSO artifact kind of vanished from public view. It wasn't put in a museum, wasn't easily available for scientists to study.
So they say, see? The government took it.
Exactly. They whisked it away to Area 51 to study it in secret. The fact that its current location is basically unknown just feeds that mystery.
And the lack of testing.
Yeah, proponents emphasize that mainstream science, the big institutions, they just refuse to do the really thorough, maybe destructive tests needed to figure out its real age and composition. For believers, that wasn't lack of interest. It was deliberate avoidance. They didn't want to find out the truth.
Because they knew what they'd find.
That's the implication. And then there's the perceived silence of the discoverers themselves. Wallace Lane and Mike Sell in later years reportedly got pretty quiet about the whole thing.
Which the conspiracy interprets as.
Them being leaned on, threats, pressure from government agencies, they were told to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, they connect it to all the other O parts. They see it as part of a bigger pattern. Anomalous artifacts keep popping up and they keep getting dismissed or explained away. It supports the idea of a broad conspiracy to control the official story of human history.
Okay, so that's the case for the conspiracy, or at least the points proponents raise. But what about the mainstream explanation? What does science actually say about the ECOSO artifact?
Well, from the perspective of science, geology, archaeology, the whole suppression theory is pretty much dismissed. The mainstream explanation is actually quite straightforward. It is a modern spark plug, but it got embedded in a naturally occurring concretion, and the ancient age was just wrong.
So it is a spark plug, but definitively identified.
Yeah. Yes. Amateur researchers, actually Chad and Marta Schaefer, I think it was, got a chance to examine it back in 1999. And they pretty positively identified it as a 1920s Champion spark plug.
Champion, like the brand.
Yeah. Probably from an old Ford Model T engine or something similar from that era. The ceramic, the brass shell, the electrode, even the springs seen in those old x-rays.
Yeah.
It all perfectly matches the design of a Champion spark plug from the 1920s.
Okay, so if it's a 1920 spark plug, that immediately rules out ancient humans or aliens, really.
Completely. And the geode part, it wasn't actually a geode in the typical sense. It was an iron oxide concretion.
Can you explain what that is? How does that form differently?
Sure. A concretion is basically a hard, solid mass that forms when minerals in groundwater precipitate out and cement sediment grains together around some kind of nucleus. That nucleus could be anything, a fossil, a pebble, or a man-made object.
Like a spark plug.
Exactly. It's like natural cement forming around something. And the key thing is, while some concretions can take a very long time, others, especially iron oxide ones forming around an iron object, they can form relatively quickly.
How quickly? Not millions of years?
No. We could be talking decades, maybe centuries, especially if you have an iron core like the casing of a spark plug acting as a catalyst. Iron rusts, leaches into the surrounding sediment, and minerals precipitate around it. It's a known geological process.
So that 500,000-year estimate was just way off.
Completely off. It seems to have been an unverified guess, maybe based on misunderstanding how concretions form, or maybe just sensationalism. There's absolutely no credible geological evidence putting a 1920s spark plug in rock strata from 500,000 years ago, the Pliocene or Pleistocene. That's just impossible. It was almost certainly found in much younger near-surface deposits.
And what about the argument that scientists refuse to study it properly?
Well, the critical point there is that the artifact was never actually submitted by the owners to a proper scientific institution for that kind of rigorous, independent, peer-reviewed analysis. Most of the examination was done by amateurs or people already invested in the OPART idea. If they genuinely believed it was ancient, the scientific thing to do would have been to get it formally studied. That never really happened.
Okay. And the disappearance. Not Area 51.
Highly unlikely. It seems it just stayed in private hands. People lose track of things, especially oddities like this. It's far more common for privately owned curiosities to just fade from view than for the government to secretly seize them. There's no actual evidence of a seizure.
So the scientific consensus is basically mistaken identity, a misunderstanding.
Pretty much. Likely a genuine discovery of something unusual. Finding a spark plug inside a rock is weird, but then interpreting its age and origin incorrectly may be fueled by wishful thinking for a spectacular find. And then the OPART community and media ran with it, showing classic confirmation bias, focusing on details that fit the theory and ignoring those that didn't.
Okay, so we have a pretty clear scientific explanation. But despite that debunking, the Coso artifact legend just persists, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why do you think these kinds of stories have such staying power?
That's a great question. I think there's just an inherent allure to OPARTs. We want the past to be more exciting, more mysterious than the standard textbook version, right? Hints of lost worlds, alien visits. It's captivating.
Yeah, it's definitely more romantic than spark plug falls in mud.
Right, and it also taps into a definite vein of distrust towards mainstream science and academia. For people already skeptical, any debunking just looks like the establishment trying to suppress inconvenient truths. Of course they'd say that.
The cover-up becomes proof in itself.
Exactly, and that what-if factor is just incredibly potent. The implications of aliens, lost civilizations are so huge, so mind-blowing, that even if it's explained away, the idea remains compelling. Yeah, but what if?
Plus, the initial story is quite simple, isn't it? Spark plug in a rock. Very visual, easy to grasp.
Very easy. Compared to explaining concretion formation rates and geological strata, the anomaly itself is much simpler and more dramatic. And that visual resemblance, it looks like a spark plug, is incredibly powerful. Seeing is believing, right? Even if the context makes it impossible.
And maybe it taps into broader anti-establishment feelings too. The idea that they, the powers that be, are hiding the truth to keep us down.
Definitely. It feeds that narrative. And for enthusiasts, exploring these conspiracies gives them a sense of being detectives, uncovering secrets the mainstream ignores. It's empowering in a way.
So the Coso artifact ends up being this really interesting case study. Not so much about the object itself, maybe, but about us, about how we perceive things.
I think so. It shows how easily that seeing is believing instinct can sometimes override more complex explanations. It highlights that collective desire we seem to have for a past that's more wondrous, maybe more magical than reality, and maybe our readiness to embrace narratives that challenge authority, even when the evidence points the other way.
Yeah. The real mystery isn't the rock, maybe, but why we're so fascinated by the possibility it represents.
Precisely. Why we want it to be true.
So wrapping this up, the Coso artifact really presents this stark choice, this dichotomy. On one side, you've got this paradigm-shattering OPART, proof of the impossible, suppressed by powerful forces. And on the other, a fascinating but ultimately understandable geological anomaly. A case of misinterpretation, wishful thinking maybe.
Yeah, for some, it's still that undeniable proof of ancient tech, deliberately buried. For science, it's a 1920s spark plug that got naturally encased in a fairly young rock. A cool find, but not ancient or alien.
But even though mainstream science has pretty thoroughly debunked it, identified the spark plug, explained the concretion, the story, the conspiracy, it just keeps sparking people's imaginations, doesn't it?
It really does. Its lasting power comes from hitting all those buttons. Our yearning for lost wonders, our fascination with aliens, that nagging distrust of official stories.
So, as you think about the world around you, maybe consider the Coso artifact. What does it really tell us about our own tendency to look for deeper mysteries, to question the official line?
Yeah, and how easily our imagination can take something, maybe even mundane, and turn it into something miraculous. We're always searching for those secrets, aren't we? Just beyond what we're told is real.
The captivating what-if of the Olancha Geode. It just keeps going. It reminds you that sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't really out there in the objects we find, but maybe in how we choose to see them, how we interpret them,